welcome to the News International edition on this 4th day of September 2023. We are broadcasting to you live from our Vision Group headquarters here in Kampala, Uganda. I'm Emma Akwero. We start today from Gabon, where General Brice Nguema, who last week led a coup against Gabon's 55-year-old dynasty, has taken oath of office as interim president. Nguema promised to hold free and fair elections after an unspecified period of time. We'll bring you more of this.
General Brice Oligui Nguema, the head of the elite Republican Guard, led officers in a coup against President Ali Bongo Ondimba, son of a family that had ruled since 1967 in Gabon. The ousting came just months after Bongo was proclaimed victor in last month's presidential election, a result branded a fraud by the opposition. Dressed in the red ceremonial costume of the Republican Guard, Nguema also swore to preserve the achievements of democracy at the ceremony held before judges of the Constitutional Court. He immediately pledged in a speech to hold free and transparent elections after a transition period which he did not specify, and to amnesty prisoners of conscience. The coup leaders on Wednesday said they had dissolved the nation's institutions, cancelled the election results and temporarily closed the borders. Other countries have not acknowledged Nguema as Gabon's legitimate leader, and he faces pressure to spell out his plans for restoring civilian rule. Nguema was lifted up triumphantly by his troops following the announcement of the coup, and in the days since has been seen flanked by generals and colonels. He has also held hours of high-profile discussions with business and religious leaders, unions, political parties, NGOs, diplomats and journalists, and has been taking notes and responding at length to questions and grievances. On Friday, he vowed to create more democratic institutions that respect human rights, but said he would proceed without haste. A few of the former opposition is urging Nguema to hand over power, but many people in Gabon seem happy about the overthrow of the Bongo dynasty, with celebrations in the streets of the capital Libreville and the economic hub of Port-Gentil. Several Western countries and organizations have condemned the coup while acknowledging that it is different to others on the continent due to concerns over the credibility of the vote itself. Former President Bongo had been seeking his third term in office after coming to power in 2009 following the death of his father Omar Bongo, who ruled Gabon with an iron fist for over 40 years. The coup leaders say they had put him under house arrest and placed him in retirement. But Bongo managed to distribute a video on social media where he said his son and wife Sylvia had been detained, and appealing to all friends that we have all over the world to make noise on his behalf. National TV on Friday showed rolling images of the deposed president's son Nordine Bongo Valentin and other arrested officials in front of suitcases filled with cash allegedly seized from their homes. The military has accused them of treason, embezzlement, corruption, and falsifying the president's signature, among other allegations. 5 other countries in Africa, Mali, Guinea, Sudan, Burkina Faso, and Niger, have undergone coups in the last 3 years. Their new rulers have resisted demands for a short timetable for returning to barracks.
Now, in Libya's capital, Tripoli, improved electricity has brought about improved energy after years of conflict and power cuts. Chronic electricity outages had shaped the daily lives of Libyans since the fall of Muammar Gaddafi in a NATO-backed uprising.
After the fall of Muammar Gaddafi, fighting between rival armed groups followed. There was also combat damage and looting to an already dilapidated power grid in the North African country. Power outages were a disaster for my business. It was hard to bake and grow the business because you just never knew when electricity would go on for how long.
بتكون فيه خدمات متميزة، خدمات كويسة. طبعا ما فيش تشغيل للمولدات، ما فيش مصاريف أخرى مصاحبة للخدمات الإنتاجية هذه.
After 42 years in power, Gaddafi left behind obsolete infrastructure an economy largely dependent on oil and an underskilled workforce. To protect the network and prevent overloads, the General Electricity Company of Libya resorted to widespread power cuts over the past 10 years during the peak consumption periods of summer and winter. Until last year, outages could last 10 or even 20 hours, turning the city's streets dark and leaving residents sweltering in summer temperatures above 40 degrees Celsius without air conditioning. But with new management at Gabon since last year, along with a relatively stable security situation, Libyans now receive a markedly improved electricity supply. Some foreign companies have now revived projects they had suspended in Libya. The situation has improved and customers notice it. But even with the generator, refrigerators were weakening after 10 hours. That has been a major challenge. To avoid countless sleepless nights, Libyans did adapt to the power outages, buying batteries costing a few hundred dinars. They could power a television set and 1 or 2 lamps, as well as provide basic internet connectivity. Those who could not afford it spent thousands of dollars on buying noisy, polluting, fuel-guzzling generators. Since the 2020 ceasefire between Libya's two rival administrators, the country has been slowly trying to rebuild. The electricity supply has improved countrywide, although the boost to Tripolis was the most dramatic and significant. Electricity network stability is the foundation of the Return to Life campaign launched by the city government and is slowly restoring Tripoli's soul. Residents proudly nicknamed their city Siren of the Mediterranean for its attractive seafront. It is clear that administrative stability within Gabon has contributed to the stability of the power network, but consumers also have a role to play in reducing their consumption and paying their bills.
Now, Pope Francis capped the final day of his diplomatically tinged visit to Mongolia, preaching charity with a visit to a Catholic shelter for the homeless and domestic violence victims. Pope Francis is the first head of the Catholic Church to visit Mongolia.
The visit to inaugurate the House of Mercy, which also includes a clinic in a poor area on the outskirts of the capital, Ulaanbaatar, suits the 86-year-old Pope's long-standing practice of reaching out to marginalized and overlooked communities. Francis's voyage to the Central Asian nation, the first by a pope, has been overshadowed by his overtures to its powerful neighbor, China. Some Chinese Catholics traveled to Mongolia to catch a glimpse of Pope Francis up close. Outside the shelter, a group of women sang in Mandarin, wiping away tears as the Pope's black vehicle passed. The pontiff directly addressed Catholics in China on Sunday in impromptu comments following a mass telling them to be good Christians and good citizens in an apparent attempt to ease tensions with Beijing. After the mass, attended by many of Mongolia's tiny Catholic population, numbering just 1,400, Francis sent a warm greeting to the noble Chinese people. It was the second apparent overture to the Chinese Communist Party in 2 days, following Francis telling a gathering of missionaries on Saturday that governments had nothing to fear from the Catholic Church. The Pope's plane took off shortly after midday. He hailed the Mongolian friendship he received over the 4-day trip. China's government, which is officially atheist, is wary of the Catholic Church on its territory and exercises strict control over all recognized religious institutions. Mongolia has one of the world's youngest and smallest Catholic communities, estimated at approximately 1,400 people among its population of 3.3 million. It has just 25 Catholic priests, only 2 of them Mongolian, and 33 nuns. Freedom of religion is guaranteed in its constitution.
Now, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, peace seems to be out of reach and aid is in short supply. In camps for displaced people in the war-torn eastern province of Ituri, despair is growing on the back of violent horrors experienced amidst a feeling of abandonment. We bring you more of this.
The Islamist ADF, affiliated to the Islamic State group, has been wreaking havoc since the 1990s in the north of the country's neighboring province of North Kivu, but has in recent years spread its tentacles to Ituri. They compete with the shoal of local militia to outdo each other in barbarity, one such group being Codeco, which is accused of killing at least 15 people last month in a fishing camp. The locality of Commander, a destination for those fleeing the violence, hosts around 40,000 displaced people who, according to the local humanitarian community, get by with very little assistance. In Bunia, another displacement camp set up in the town in 2019 is home to more than 14,000 whose already worrying situation has been getting even worse given an ongoing spate of attacks on several nearby villages. UN estimates say there are around 1.7 million people displaced in Ituri. Clashes between different militia between 1999 and 2003 left thousands dead in Ituri, and after a decade of calm, the unrest resumed in 2017. Over the past year, humanitarian needs have risen still further, owing to new conflicts on the resurgence of others, such as M23 rebellion in North Kivu. Soldiers moved out from the neighboring provinces, including Ituri, to intervene there, and this created a security vacuum that other armed groups rushed to cover. Displaced people criticized the government for not coming to their aid. Overall, the DRC has more than 6 million internally displaced people, mainly concentrated in Ituri, North and South Kivu. The UN Office for Humanitarian Coordination says that of the $2.25 billion that's required to help them, only $747 million was available as of August 16th.
Now, 5 civilians have been killed by a bomb that fell on their homes in Khartoum a day after an airstrike in the city's south killed at least 20 civilians. Since the war began between the regular army and the paramilitary rapid support forces on April 15th of this year, around 5,000 people have been killed, according to conservative estimates from the Armed Conflict and Location and Event Data Project.
The Sudanese armed forces control the skies and have carried out regular airstrikes, while the RSF fighters dominate the streets of the capital. Western countries have accused the paramilitaries and allied militias of killings based on ethnicity in the Western Darfur region, and the International Criminal Court has opened a new probe into alleged war crimes. The army has also been accused of abuses, including a July 8th airstrike that killed around 24 civilians. More than half of Sudan's 48 million people now require humanitarian aid and protection, and 6 million are one step away from famine, according to the United Nations. Despite insecurity, looting and bureaucratic obstacles, the world body says it has been able to get aid to millions of those in need. The war has internally displaced around 3.8 million people, while another million have crossed borders into neighboring countries. Among the displaced are nearly 2.8 million from Khartoum, according to the International Organization for Migration. That is more than half of the capital's pre-war population of around 5 million. Those who remain shelter from the crossfire, rationing water and electricity. In Khartoum, resistance committees have been some of the only sources of relief, helping dig survivors out of the rubble of bombed buildings, braving gunfire on the streets to deliver medicine, and documenting atrocities committed by both sides. Nearly 5 months in, the violence shows no signs of abating.
And finally, Kenya has unveiled plans to roll out electric motorbikes across the country under a green transport scheme to reduce carbon emissions and pollution. President William Samoei Ruto announced the initiative with Africa Startup Spiro Days before he hosted the first Africa Climate Summit in Nairobi. We have more.
Accordingly, through the bottom-up economic transformation agenda we have developed, the commitment that I see here today speaks to the success of we are doing something about it. In order to achieve this interim, we have designed and designated, I am delighted, to preside over the launch of the Africa Smart Mobility Solutions Kenya Limited by Spiro, an e-mobility giant with a track record of success stories in electric vehicle industry whose footprint spreads from Benin to Togo all the way to Rwanda.
President William Ruto said Kenya currently has 1,000 of the new e-bikes with another 10,000 on their way, and that Spiro had established a plant with the capacity to assemble 1,000 of the vehicles daily. Ruto said about 2 million motorbikes are on the roads in Kenya, mostly border borders or two-wheeled taxis that are commonly used across the continent.
The adoption of electric mobility is a high priority intervention to address the challenges of pollution, adverse health effects, and fuel costs, which raise the cost of living. Successful transition of e-mobility requires a fundamental reconfiguration of our transportation systems through electrification and the provision of every necessary service and infrastructures throughout the ecosystem.
Ruto said Kenya aims to eventually phase out the combustion engine-powered motorbikes, warning that the increasing use of such vehicles across the continent had serious implications for climate change and air quality. Although Africa contributes only 2 to 3% of global greenhouse gas emissions, it suffers disproportionately from climate change, according to the UN Environment Programme. Spiro said it had already introduced nearly 10,000 electric bikes in Africa to countries including Benin, Togo, Rwanda, and Uganda. It said in a statement it plans to set up 3,000 battery charging and swapping stations in Kenya, in addition to 350 already across Africa, with a planned rollout eventually of more than 1 million electric vehicles throughout the country. On Thursday, the US app-based taxi service Uber announced the launch of its own electric motorcycle taxis in Nairobi in what it said was a first for the company in Africa. Uber said about 3,000 bikes were planned initially, claiming they would cut running costs of drivers by 30 to 35% and reduce fares by about 15 to 20%. According to the World Bank, the border sector in Kenya employs over 1.5 million young people and contributes about 202 billion Kenyan shillings to the economy each year. Kenya's government has said it is aiming for 5% of all registered vehicles to be electric powered by 2030. Currently, the number of registered electric vehicles accounts for less than 1% of the total 4.4 million registered vehicles, according to government figures. Ruto, who has positioned himself at the forefront of African efforts to combat climate change, said Kenya had the potential by 2030 to generate 100% of its energy from renewable sources such as hydroelectric, geothermal, solar and wind power from more than 90% now. But the country suffers from frequent power cuts. A massive outage last weekend left several regions without electricity for hours, including Nairobi and its international airport, which was plunged into darkness after a generator serving the main terminals failed. Fuel prices at the pump have recently soared to their highest levels in more than a decade, adding to the economic hardships of Kenyans suffering from a cost of living crisis and a raft of new taxes.
And that's all the international news we had for you this afternoon. We'll be back again tomorrow at 4 p.m. Thank you for watching and have a good afternoon.